Thank you so much, Mr. Alfonso Albaisa, for such an engrossing session on future of car design in disrupted world. You have immaculately presented the technical, aesthetical, and sustainable global car design trends that will shape up the future. Moving on, since morning, we have had quite interesting sessions on tools and technology, especially the use of simulation and other virtual technology in terms of development and design of products, components, or cars. To break the monotony, in this session, we will discuss the commercial aspect of the use of process technologies such as simulation. Rightly so, we have the top business leaders and CEOs who play the crucial role of making judicious use of time and resources to make the product commercially successful. They are the baton holders in the journey from drawing room to boardroom and eventually reaching to the end customers. Once again, welcome to the ETAuto Simulation and Testing Congress, and the session for this hour is role of cost-effective and quick design in the success of product. Let me introduce to you today's esteemed panel member. We have Mr. Suresh KB, President ZF India, with proven ability to create strategic clarity, organizational innovation and growth, and to deliver optimum results. Suresh KB is the resident of ZF in India, having a track record of over 25 years working across Bajaj Auto, Western, and Philips. We also have Mr. Anil Kumar, Managing Director, President, ACG Automotive India Private Limited. Anil is a leading professional in India's automotive component space. She is Managing Director and Regional President of the Indian operation of ACG Automotive. Earlier, it was part of Bosch Group. We also have Mr. Gaurav Gupta, Senior Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer of MG Motors. With his rich global experience in General Motor for over 20 years and Bridgestone Tire in Indonesia, Gaurav is now the Chief Commercial Officer at MG Motor. In the automotive industry, he has headed sales and marketing after sales, so he understands the pulse of the market very well. At the end, we also have Mr. Suresh D, Group CTO, Spark Minda. With over 25 years of experience in automotive, Suresh is one of the primary baton holders of the innovation and technology in Indian auto component industry. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining in ETAuto Simulation and Testing Congress. Once again, welcome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining in at ETAuto panel discussion today. I just want to understand, starting with you, Gaurav, you are Chief Commercial Officer at MG Motor. So there's always tussle between the development team and the marketing team or the commercial team. They try to balance the investment versus the ROI that they see in a product. How does technology enables you to bridge this gap that is always there between the two parties in a company?
Well, Nabeel, thank you for putting me first on the block. But I must say that we have a very august panel here today, and I think the technology drivers are my fellow panelists. So good afternoon, everyone. I think more than a tussle, Nabeel, I think the right way to put this would always be if you put the consumer at the center of all of your operations in your operation in your company, because ultimately, whether it is the market forces that is requesting for a technology upgrade or a particular feature, it is all eventually driven by who will be your target audience, who is your target customer. So I think once that fundamental pivot, that central point is well understood by the entire organization, and then also the stakeholders come onto picture, and I think if everybody is aligned on that, come on the common vision, then all of it kind of pans out. There will always be, operational, sinusoidal curves also in terms of, what can be the timelines for a particular aspect, what can be the typical comments come about cost recovery and how long will this technology remain, what is the life cycle of this particular attribute that you want to bring in the product, and likewise. But I think all of it then gets simply linked on to the consumer. So if a company keeps that as the fundamental North Star as a fundamental guiding principle, then I don't see much of a tussle per se, other than normal discussion, which are very healthy actually in any organization, to be making sure that the progress is to give your customer the best experience, the best product, and obviously depending on what your brand stands for, what you prioritize in terms of the master list that you would create for your product. And that is where the partners come onto the platform as well, in terms of the technology walk, in terms of your 3, 5, 10-year cycle. Typically, what would be the range and what will be the interspan of all the switches coming in? What will be the comparative landscape? So all of that comes into the discussion per se. It's not just about marketing front end and the the engineering prowess and the teams put together.
Thank you, Gaurav, for those initial remarks. We'll certainly get into more detail. I'll just bring in KV here. KV, just want to understand, because we have seen the trend is changing when it comes to supplier side. A lot of design and development work is taking place at the component manufacturer level also. And earlier it was individual component. Now we see a large number of system supplies happening. Our component maker is seen as a system supplier. So what's your thought? What are the key challenges that you face in terms of delivering those systems, component systems, sub-assemblies in a record time? That because the demand from the customer side is also increasing, because the time to market a product has reduced significantly, almost 1.5 years, 2 years now.
I think it's a very relevant question you are asking, and world has moved from individual child part suppliers to system suppliers, and we as an organization at ZF also are eager to become more system suppliers than component suppliers. And the advantage of having being a system supplier is that we are not just looking at mating parts and making sure that this component fits into the product. We are more looking at the function of the system itself, whether it is a transmission system or whether it is a shock absorber, whichever it is. We always talk about a system to be delivered, and that system has functional performances which will be immediately or will be directly seen by the customer at the end product level. This actually poses positive challenges in front of the customer, in front of the supplier, because now we are not just producing something to a drawing. We are producing something to the specifications which the customer places in front of you at the time of development. Here, one of the critical factors is that what we call it as the early introduction of suppliers in the product cycle. Very important that when the end customer or the OEM is producing or is visualizing the vehicle, at that point in time itself, if the system supplier is introduced into the entire design process, then we are talking about a collaborative effort to bring in a vehicle into the market which meets the specification, which meets the expectations of the customer, both at the end customer level as well as at the OE level. Now, this also puts in a responsibility of certain amount of design to be completed by this by the supplier himself. So the design responsibility for the system falls onto the customer. So in a way, in front of the supplier, in a way, the supplier also becomes has the similar processes of designing a concept, making sure that that concept is visualized when they manufacture the product, and it is seen as a performance parameter when it is finally assembled in the vehicle. So very important that the supplier has design capabilities. Now, when it comes to an Indian market, what is important is, and many of the customers, I'm sure that with the important customers also in the panel, the customer expects technology at affordable cost. We can talk about Western technology, but definitely, today it is an expensive proposition as far as an Indian customer is concerned. So the responsibility of multinationals like us to deliver these products in the Indian market is to make sure that we are able to adopt the technology, adapt to the requirements of the Indian market and make sure that the customer is able to, that the OEM is able to convert.
Suresh, if you could briefly give us an idea how this challenge of system sub-assemblies and progress from the child part to assemblies and sub-assemblies is being dealt with in terms of technological intervention, what kind of digitalization or digitization you are adopting, if you could quickly briefly tell us.
So today,
how much of a spend, your target expenditure going on these kind of technology upgradation?
So the first and foremost is we need to have local engineering. You see, we cannot be dependent upon European engineering because one, it is not affordable. Second, it is not available in the time frame. And third, the understanding of the Indian market is much better when it comes to Indian engineers. So very important that we have to have local engineering. The second important aspect is when we take up a system and understand the performance parameters, we need to adapt the performance parameters also to the Indian context. So that is adaptation of the engineering. We can utilize various design tools, and the digitalization, as you rightly said, is a critical factor. Today, there is no paper and pencil drawing anymore in the real world. It is all computerized systems, and we look at those, and we can even do simulations to understand whether we are meeting the customer specifications or not. Then the third and important aspect is even when the customer makes sure that he is assembling all this, we can even do it on a digital manner. So the entire visualization of the product has moved from a physical product into a digital process. And the prototypes only are made to ensure that these visualized processes are, when it in real, how do they see that? Very few adjustments happen after the prototypes are done. So very important that, we need to, the child parts are actually designed by the supplier himself. So there is a lot of change from what we had done before. Technology infusion from the Western world, adjust it to the local requirements, meet the local customer requirements. These are all the main aspects to ensure that we are speeding up and we are ensuring that we are meeting the customer.
Suresh, I still did not get the main questions answered, but I'll come back to you again. And before I go there, I just want to understand from Gaurav one thing, and then I'll go to Anil ji. Gaurav, what is the expected time? How soon do you expect to upgrade or make minor modification in your models? Because we see the consumer expectation is, increasing. But if you look at the volumes right now in a current situation when the volume is shrinking, but the demand in terms of exciting the market, you have to bring a new model every time, or you have to bring some changes, minor changes. If you look at the cost versus the volume that you are going to get, or if you talk about the ROI, how are you trying to manage that? And what is the way forward? How technology can help you, or is it helping you?
So like this KV just mentioned, right? If you get your partners, supplier partners, and your engineering partners on board from the very beginning, then you have the entire roadmap. And it actually, Nabeel, would vary from company to company, and within the company also, within a portfolio, it will also vary by model also, because it plays in different segments, and the consumer preferences are different, and sometimes the competitive actions are different, and the technology leaps by the help of the ecosystem also impacts the timing. So what typically would be earlier, let us say, people were looking at 5 years for a full model year change, which was the norm in the last few years. All of those are being, challenged and questioned, because I think all of them are being challenged and questioned, not for the purpose of just questioning, but the entire appetite. All of us, we know that we all want things faster in our overall life cycle, whether it's a mobile phone or whether it's a television upgrade, you name it. So in a similar environment, the upgrades on your automotive preferences also are changing. So, ROI for a feature, ROI for a full change, it depends. You can have a model year change, you can have a full model change, as we sometimes call it, or a partial change. There are various ways to do it. Does it require a transmission change altogether, or is it a facelift? There are various nomenclatures which vary company to company, and each of these programs are backed, right from the concept stage in the beginning of the program as to what's going to come in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and likewise. and that all goes into the program cost, right? So, and that is how it is mapped. So it will not be, I would be surprised if it's taken as an ad hoc decision to say, let's bring a modular change after 1 year or 2 years, and then start to working out the maths. That typically will be a bit challenging. However, having said so, certain introductions of features, if it is a, really going to be a competitive advantage and can be speeded up to the market, then obviously the teams get together to execute it. And keeping in mind that there is a testing process for that, there, for example, if you look at India particularly, you have to have the entire CMVR or, homologation process coming in picture. Testing happens also internally within the organization. Then you bring it to the market. So there is an entire, well-managed process which brings all these upgrades, technologies to the consumer for his or her experience on the road.
I understand that, Gaurav. Thank you so much. Of course, it is pre-plan and long-term plan takes place when you are launching a platform or a product. But there are scenarios like these, like pandemic or something happens or legislative change that is announced, then you are supposed to bring out the change. In such a scenario, Anil ji, I just want to understand how technology is playing a role here and how much of your I will ask the same question, expenditure in terms of product development goes into putting the right technology in place, and what are those right technologies? Is simulation really the game changer? Do you think that really works for the actual condition testing, or is there a midway? How are we utilizing this for at the component level?
Yeah, first of all, Nabeel, pleasure to be a part of this esteemed panel and good to be talking to you. I will just step back a bit and look at the market, like what Gaurav just mentioned, and look from the market and customer perspective, and then come into the industry itself and then what we are doing. When I look at the market is highly dynamic. No need to mention this. And the time cycles are reducing, the product life cycles are reducing. A typical example is the BS6. Industry was given just 3 years to switch to BS6 from BS4. It was a leapfrog. We had to do it. There was no chance. And that was a time when simulations actually came in a big way. It's about 3 to 4 years now since simulation is used as a tool to reduce the timelines, number one. Second one is the upcoming legislations don't give us time. For example, the CAFC2, which is coming up in 2022, 2023, or the RDE, which is coming in 23, 24, they're all up here. So we have to get going now in order to meet those timelines. So timelines are collapsing. Another very important, which Gaurav also brought about, is the customized requirements of many OEMs, because they need to come out with USPs in the market. Otherwise, it doesn't sell. So how fast can these USPs be bought in the shortest lead time and cost optimal? That's the key challenge that's in front of all the component industry. And when I say component, of course, it's just not the product, but product plus solutions. Now, let me translate this into what the industry sees. For the industry, what does it mean? It means first time right design. That means there is no question of trial and error that we used to do once upon a time. So it means that we will have to go for the design concept verification using simulations and optimize it well. And this is a very crucial point, which I will address what you mentioned. Now, the design simulation and validation will make us put the product fit to market. Earlier, there was a tendency to over-design a product. But now we can make optimal design to the products with the right safety levels, ensuring reliability, but reducing cost. And this comes due to simulations. Because even before a physical product is made in the prototyping, we can figure out what is the right best fit for the design. Second one is the modularity of the design is coming into picture significantly. Earlier, it was not the case. Now platforms are modular, be it the OEMs. And of course, it follows up with us as component. So we make designs modular. However, there is an however here is we customize those platforms to the needs of specific customers. By doing this, there are two things. One, timeline collapses. Second one, it becomes cost optimal because we need not invest once more on a bigger platform. You make the incremental changes, then you have a product. That's the second one. The third one, coming to the cost part and also the speed part, is design for manufacturing. It's extremely crucial. It's not that you make a great design and it's so difficult to manufacture. A typical example is snap fits. If you make products that can be easy to manufacture, there again, you're addressing the cost angle. But this again, you can do with virtual simulations to check out how you can optimize the time and also the ease of manufacturing. Collapsing the timelines of samples, the rapid prototyping, the 3D printing has come in. Of course, there is a trade-off between cost and time here. If you have time, you can go in for regular conventional samples, but otherwise you can look in for 3D printing also. So that's an option here in front of us. The last and the most important is testing and validation. Earlier, we used to take months for field validation, but today with simulations, you can really create the real world situations using simulations and make failure analysis. And I can underline the word failure analysis because having learned from the field is too late. The cost of exponentially going up field failures versus attacking that at the design time gives great customer satisfaction and reduced costs over a lifetime of the product. So in short, Nabeel, answering your question, simulation is in. That is the right way. It has already been set in. Now we have to further move up on that. It helps us to make the product fit to market, which itself reduces cost. And second one, bringing in the amount of reliability and stability, not learning from the field, but doing it well before that. And there are different tools, the FEA, the CFDs, the MBDs, it can go on. But we are into it. And just from the SCG point of view, we provide these services to the SCG world itself. India is the hub of software. And we're using it as one of the launch pads. And we are also the software testing competence center for the globe for SCG. So it's already in, and we use this extensively to optimize our products.
Thank you, Anil. Rightly pointed the time to market and life cycle of the product, the way it is changing and how technology simulation is being used to help in this direction. But at the same time, we have seen again the deceit devices story has come to haunt the automotive industry globally. I'll go and discuss that part. How does it, how design and development is responsible for that, or at the level of design and development, where are we missing and how can we correct in terms of having no or less number of such cases. Now you see the big three giants have been coming out in that space again. They have been blamed for using deceit devices, and some of them have admitted to that. But before that, I'd like to bring in Suresh here. Suresh, you are a technology guy. You have been developing component for a long time for an Indian company. Just want to understand how difficult it is for an Indian company to adopt to such advanced level of simulation or the virtual technology when it comes to developing prototypes or developing the products. Is fund a constraint yet, or how are you trying to collaborate, or what are the methods you are trying to keep yourself, competing with the global giants?
First of all, thank you, Nabeel, for this wonderful platform. I think I really appreciate you for pulling me in. You asked the right question, and your question selection is good, of course. Being an Indian tier one and aspiring to lead and want to be the leader, not the follower, the challenges are manifold, especially in the product development and design. If you see the way India market has progressed, the transformation of the technology is very fast. Earlier, there were goalposts when it comes at regulation or anything implementation related or any technological changes which is acceptable to the OEM, to the end user. It was taking time, but now the advancement of the technology is fast. Now this puts the pressure back on the companies, and lots and lots of technology evolution is happening, and there is a pie for Indian tier ones like us to excel in this. So that's why I think the companies are putting R&D centers, design development centers, testing centers, and so on. So one aspect. Second, moving forward, more and more electronic content is expected in automobiles. These regulatory frameworks brings electronic control units, digital panels, clusters, infotainments to make the user comfortable and also to at the same time meet the regulatory things. Now, always the OEM expect things are faster because they have a shorter time frame, and also the cost, so these are the two things. When I talk about the timeline, or when I talk about the challenges in the technology stuff, when it comes to the electronics, India is not a country where very strong footholds, like for example the manufacturing of electronic technology like wafers or something not exist, but we have a strength like in software development. So if you look at the vehicles now with more and more electronics, more and more software content is going inside. You take a simple an ECU has 4 to 5 million codes, so which means about 20 to 30 ECUs. So which means a huge amount of software is going inside the ECU, inside the vehicle as well. So now this needs to be tested thoroughly. So as a ownership of the component guys, a component guy itself is becoming a component guy to system supplier, and then to the OEM. So we ourselves have to do certain testings, certain qualification before we even hand over our system to the customer. So this involves a tremendous work. For example, hardware in loop testing, software in loop testing, electromagnetic interference and compatibility, because lots of electronic gadgets now. So you need to test your product before you even hand over to the customer. So which means, the complexity increases, and for the complexity, you need to ensure that your design is first time right. And also you test the product and you hand over to the customer, So always, customer, for a customer, what he physically sees, he is ready to pay. But what is inside virtually the software, whether it's a 5 million code or 50 million code, customers are not really bothered about. I mean, this is a trend in India, but of course it will change in overseas where the customers are even ready to pay for that. So that's a challenge, of course, on the component guys like us. So which means the investment on the technology in terms of testing, simulation, Anil rightly said, lots of simulation needs to be done because time is short now. So we need to try to bring everything in the lab. That's what we call lab car. Means we create a car condition within the lab, to do the testing and so on. And then comes to the timeline, where we need to find a way to squeeze the timeline. It could be through the simulation, or it could be to some testings, or the latest concept we say modules or platforms, which is being used by the well-known MNCs or overseas companies. And Indian company like us now, we are also moving into the kind of platform. By doing this, we can reuse the modules, reuse the software. So by doing this, timeline goes down and also cost increases. Minda Corporation, I think we have been also on the path, and we are also working with various customers on the system solutions. And this is very important for now every company of in Indian automotive tier 1s to also migrate themselves from a component guy to a system supplier. That also increases the responsibility. Obviously, we can also bring down the timeline and the cost over the time.
So thank you so much, Suresh. So you are talking about modular platform. I'll go to Gaurav and understand from him. Of course, modular platforms are very good when it comes to commercial viability. Just want to understand, we have seen an increasing number of recalls happening. As a commercial person who leads the commercial part of a company, car maker, I just want to understand the setback of a recall. How does it pan out for a company? And what are the reasons that you see that an increasing number of recalls are happening? Is it because of the same modular platform where we try to use a similar platform for different kind of vehicle models? Are there not enough testing happening, or is there some issue with that accuracy in terms of designing a product? Where do you see that missing link that needs to be worked upon?
Yes, well. So I think one journey is, of course, a component to a system supplier. And this doesn't simply come, it comes with a responsibility. Also, it comes with a system knowledge, So many tier 1s been used to the component knowledge where the customer gives the specification and then you do the print to spec of it. But then when you have to become a system guy and that goes out, I think you need to define the specification for that. Okay, now you define the specification, but then some conditions like the certain recalls happens. It could be maybe because of the interfaces between other components in the vehicle, where the test cases are missed out. For example, every guy for a particular system, they create a test cases, and the test cases in the form of hardware in loop, software in loop, vehicle in loop, EMI/MC. So you create a test cases. Sometimes you miss out the test cases. Maybe you are not able to understand that kind of worst case condition on the field. possibly you're not able to predict that. So the prediction of this can come only with an experience, So you need to have the system knowledge and then you need to have that experience. So when you miss out this possibly, so one layer is the component or a tier one guys where we can do. Second is also OEM, OEM also does certain tests, homologation tests, winter tests, summer tests. So
that's what I want to understand from Gaurav. What's your thought on this, Gaurav?
So I think like Suresh just pointed out, I think, and Anil referred to this earlier, the failure analysis, becomes very critical. When you're looking at test simulation results, you're looking at predictive analysis coming in, the interplay of components, all of this comes into play, affecting your quality of the product eventually. And like every company, and for all of us even at MG, every part, everything goes through a proper quality process check. Individual at the component level, also at the same time, when you have the entire aggregate built in together, and eventually delivering not only end of line, but also before the car is given out to the consumers on the ground. But all of this is all tests, and there is always there is scientific data which goes across, which comes in. So even though you may be having natural conditions testing, like Suresh said, whether it's hot weather or it's cold conditions, humidity tests, all tests are conducted. But there could be various reasons for recalls, and also recalls impacting various categories. Is it a safety impact, or is it a ABC categorization of recalls also are there, and accordingly the regulations are formed, and the companies obviously act on that as well. But I think in any case, most important part for any recall is obviously cost factor. Secondly, it also involves your brand, and I think most importantly, I think if there's anything wrong which has to be recalled, one should do it, because that actually makes, in my opinion, that one is of course the process gaps, lapses which could be there, or some new environmental changes would have happened which were not there at the time of testing. But fair enough, I'm not saying that's acceptable, but that is one part of it. But I think for every responsible OEM, coming out upfront is always better, and I would always echo that, because that makes you really go for authenticity, and you are being transparent with your consumers and with your brand custodians. So that is important. So on one hand, sometimes one may feel it's going to impact the brand in a negative way, but actually, if you ask me, it actually is helping your brand to become stronger, because you are able to call out the the flaws or the gaps, whatever it is, out in the open, and at the same time also share what process improvements you are putting in internally or in your partner's end as well, so that this is mitigated or eradicated in the future. And also what extra precautions are you taking as you go forward. I think those are the ways to address it eventually. I'd say just because of modularity reasons like we just talked about, whether it's a particular batch quality of a raw material, for example, or intercomponent play, etc. So it'll be unfair to just say because of modular technology and modular approach, the recalls are there in the market.
We cannot blame one technology or one format. Just want to take your view, KV and Anil ji, quickly.
Yeah, maybe I will just pitch in here, Nabeel. While it comes to the situation of the recall or whatever it is the ultimate result, is what I see. But the enablers to this is a lot behind in the earlier stages. So first of all, it starts from, as I initially mentioned, the product fit to market. Are we giving the product that fits the market? See, there could be an international product, but that cannot come to the region unless it is customized. Typical example I can tell you is about protection features. If it is, for example, the water protection features, the nature of water ingress in different parts of the world is different. So we need to care for it, so that at the point at which we introduce the product, we need to check out how is the final application going to be. And this actually is the most preventive and the best method to start off. And I also told the failure analysis. And the failure analysis, the power of simulation is failure analysis, because you can have a sensitivity analysis of the influence of various subparts into the main part. And then you will come to know where you need to build that amount of stability and rigidness so that it doesn't give way. So I would put a lot of onus on the preventive steps at the product design stage to be important. Having said this, the second is the integration. A product could be great, but badly integrated is a recipe for disaster. This again, the simulation tools helps us to optimize as a system. And during the process of optimizing as a system, actually cost can be reduced because the sum total need not be the same levels. So at the point of system development, we can look at cost reduction plus reliability improvement. And this is the second part. And I'm all talking to you from the preventive method rather than the end result of a recall. This is the second one. The third one, most important, is the process stability of manufacturing. The design could give the right specs, but are we able to hold those tolerances during consistent series manufacturing? So this is the third important factor, that it is equally important to bring in the right quality systems that ensures that what we produce is matching the specs what we started off. And having said this, together into the vehicle and the OEM himself releasing it after a lot of tests from his side makes it so good enough, because experience counts here. The lessons learned from the others should be shared by the industry so that we don't get into issues of any such recalls. This is what is my personal opinion.
That's why we have created these platforms that we can share best practices in this.
Exactly. And the main idea is how the end consumer can be protected so that he's not affected with a huge amount of database that we already have and possess.
Thank you, Anil. Suresh, what's your thought? He thinks that correlation and matching of the specs and integration, proper integration is key to the safer production of the products and vehicles. What's your thought?
I think Anil has more or less mentioned everything. Not much is left to talk about as far as prevention is concerned. However, it is also important we need to understand that any combination always has its own surprises which will come out, because it is a different equilibrium altogether. And it is very important that we need to look at that specifically in a particular vehicle, because it is different. It's a completely different set of combination. And hence we cannot rule out this, the after analysis, which we need to do, definitely. And again, relate it back. Once you see a problem, you relate it back to your design. Make sure that those corrections and preventions are adapted again to ensure that this doesn't repeat. So while all these preventions are possible with the amount of digitalization and the tools which we have today, it is also important that we should not really forget the after effects and the after analysis which we need to do, and connect it to the various input parameters so that later it is not repeated. So it's a very, very important aspect in any analysis. Of course, yeah, a recall has its own consequences, but I think sometimes in the initial phases, the recalls can help you to really address a problem to which can in the long run will be a big advantage, because that we are at completely eliminating the problem.
Computing and keeping the after effects is very important, and regularly working based on those data is that plays a very important role in terms of improving or preventing further such event. Just want to understand, if you look at the recall, the mega recalls that globally has happened because of the suppliers, which are quite big, huge ones. And that's why the impact is equally huge. Look at the airbag recall or several other recalls that we have seen. So they have all the available resources to use the most sophisticated simulation and all. Why did this happen? Do you think there is a lapse in terms of the collaboration they are doing with the OEM, and where is the missing link? What really goes wrong? I'll start with you, Anil, and then probably Suresh and Mr. KV can also answer.
Yeah, Nabeel, it's a tough question right now, because of course it depends on case to case as to how this has panned out. But a well-oiled collaboration between the supplier partner and the OEM in trying to release the right products and systems, I'm confident that this is preventable, because only when shortcuts are made into because of cost reasons or time reasons, and compromises are made, ultimately it leads to some lacuna in the complete system. So if it is a good collaboration between the two, and transparency is important here, and also the database of what is already there to be taken in with the lessons learned, I'm pretty confident that we can be in a position to prevent such occurrences.
Thank you, Anil. What's your thought, Suresh?
Yeah, so I think Anil is right, but additionally, I can say also designing a product for worst case scenario. Sometimes we design for a spec and we don't mind sometimes slightly beyond that, what might happen with a permutation commutation. So this is one aspect, of course, has to be also considered while a product is made. But not only on the design side, but also on the manufacturing point, there is a lot more gets added in terms of raw materials, components, and so on. But again, yes, so if we can think the boundary slightly beyond, what can happen in the field, a worst thing can happen beyond the spec, and in that condition, is the product safe? It cannot create a safety related risk to the end user, but at the worst case, it can happen that the vehicle can be stopped, but not causing a damage to the end user. So this is one. Second is also, as I said, having a strengthened test cases, predicting those things in the component level, system level, and the vehicle level, all three together, then I think some extent, but there is no, one cause we can say for this. It all depends, kind of accident happens. So then we can applicate that, but very difficult to say one or two causes, but it could be multiple.
Gaurav, your take on this?
It's very hard to add to what Anil and Suresh have already commented. But I would just say that these are unfortunate incidents which happen and which impact consumers. And every attempt has to be to learn from this, to be able to use it proactively in the future planning, for sure. And secondly, educating the entire teams as they are into the process of working together, to making sure that these checks are not missed out. And putting in more and more measures in place. I think that's the right way of going for it. And like Suresh also mentioned, I think it also will require that more transparency can also be provided. That in case if you're having a sheet metal, I'm just giving an example that if a particular supply batch is of a lower grade, what can be the risk? So like we all have tolerance levels, testing is there, but just in case if it goes beyond that also, what could be the factor, so that you're always careful about it. And I think regimental, that if the tolerance limits are crossed for any reason, it's a no-go. I think that discipline is very, very important. I think that comes right as a culture of an organization and culture of the entire relationship and partnership.
Transparency is also a very important factor, very rightly put. So, Mr. KB, I just want to understand your point of view on this.
Yeah, it's what is important is
also I want to understand how simulation kind of technology can help, how digitization, how can we use more of a technology to reduce such thing or get a check on such events.
You see, these what if scenarios can always be created in simulations, and what we need to separate, divide this is which are the ones where we'll absolutely have absolutely zero tolerance to any deviation, which are things like structural components or structural systems or even safety components, etc. But there could be certain areas where there can be certain compromises which can be done, and simulation exercises, making sure that there is transparency. And when you are talking about transparency, it is also not just saying that I have used a particular, to take the example which Gaurav said, a sheet metal, which is a little bit of a different one, but it is also important that as a responsible component, a system supplier, we also need to give the risks attached to it and the prevention causes also attached to it, because it is very important that we give a comprehensive solution. There is a problem here. These are the risks attached, and if this happens, this is what the solution is, and what are we working to ensure that this is preventable. So these sort of documentation needs to be done, and those, I think the FMEA has become more and more and more important with the now. Initially, we were just talked about one FMEA. Now we talk about manufacturing FMEA, design FMEAs, etc. And these are critical things. And again, I think we should have these things completely documented, discussed with the customer, and making sure that these are all also available at the point of use, just not make an FMEA and keep it in the design workbook, but to be used and getting updated with every small development which we do. What we generally face many a time, at least in the Indian context, is we do the activities, fail to do the documentation, and a couple of years later, we realize that, we had the same case, but we did not document it well. With the digitalization possible, with all those clouds and servers available, I think we can do that.
Thank you, Suresh. I'll come to Gaurav for one last question, then I'll ask comment from all of you on the overall subject today. Gaurav, we are talking about crash test. We see a lot of popular cars in India, they fail the crash test. And the crash test is one of the most important aspect of testing and design and development, from the skeletal to the vehicle reaches to the showroom. I just want to understand how much of physical test, how much of virtual testing is taking place in terms, if you have to bifurcate the investment that you make in terms of testing, how much is it happening on virtually right now, and how much of it in terms of physical testing, and how do you see the trend changing going forward?
I think, I'm going to add to what KV just mentioned, in terms of documentation. I think that's why new technologies like blockchain come in very handy in the overall process, because, that really provides the entire trail of testing of all the, inputs, etc. And I think that is an area that can be and should be leveraged, from a process of documentation, transparency, and availability for everyone in the entire bubble to be able to use it and really leverage it for the future planning. With respect to, you talked about crash tests, virtual versus physical. To be very honest, Nabeel, it will be very difficult for me to share, in terms of what kind of percentages are there right now versus virtual, and in terms of real crash tests. But at the same time, I must say that all the vehicles that typically would go for it will be the respective brand companies would make sure that they not only meet the regulation guidelines as a bare minimum, but also their brand plus whatever is required to be taking it to the market. Because ultimately, you are making a promise with your product when you're giving it out for the consumers to drive it.
Quick, short 30-second comment from all of you. Just want to understand, where does the investment, when you talk about process innovation or in terms of design and development, how much of your investment simulation or other digital tools are attracting right now? Is it one of the top in the chart? How is it panning out, and how do you see the future? I start with you, Anil, then everybody can join.
Yep. Nabeel, from my side, I would simply say that simulation is a part of our process, because without simulations, there can be no design and no products. And that's the way it has come into.
Is it where you are one of the top 2 spender or 3 spender in your R&D? Which are the top 3 spenders?
I would say it's one of the top 5 spends that we do today in R&D. And the basic reason is, and it has also paid us during the COVID times, when the work from home was mandatory, we lost nothing on productivity, because the simulations and the validations were being carried out right from their home. And this was the advantage, that we could also have the payback for the tools that we invested on simulations. So simulations is it is certainly on the top priorities, and the future is more and more of virtual and doing very minimal on the real actual. But here, what is more important is the database that is generated for simulation, that we are holistic and covering all aspects of risks that we do without the physical simulation. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Mr. KV, your thought. What's your thought on this? Is it one of the top 3 spending area, or top 5? Where does it feature? The entire simulation and digitization technology and tools.
I think for me also, I can agree with Anil that it is in the top 5. And today, without simulation, I don't think we can move forward, because if we have to reduce the timeline and the lead times for development, simulation plays a very critical role.
Yeah, Suresh, now.
So development tool chain is the one with more and more software, hardware contents coming in. So development toolchain is the biggest investments, to make a coding of the software or test the software or simulate the software. Same way the electronic related toolchains, mechanical CAD related toolchains, which we call it as a development toolchain. The second is the validation facilities now, with the more and more, again, electronic content, you need electromagnetic interference testing, acoustic testing, and temperature chambers vibration. So the validation testings are also another, because you are moving from a component to system supplier as a tier one, as we are, Then third, of course, is the simulation stuff, where a lot more things can be done virtually. That again saves lots of time, So I would say these three are the topmost, I would say, in the investments are concerned.
And okay, Gaurav, your thought.
So, I would just say that overall, simulation, test analysis, all the the stakeholders have really mentioned the same thing. So I would just echo the same going forward, and more transparency, collaboration, and I think accountability is also very important. Encouraging that we speak up, the required team members speak up and bring the issues to the table. That becomes a very core part of the culture of a relationship and an organization.
These were some of the thoughts that the industry leaders have put across when it comes to designing and developing products for safely, securely, and on time rollout of the product. Thank you so much once again for joining ETAuto Simulation and Testing Congress. See you at the other side of this session. We have another panel discussion coming up. Thank you so much once again for joining ETAuto Simulation and Testing Congress.